So during the last election, there was a ballot initiative in Florida to legalize medical marijuana, and it failed. It needed 60% of the vote to become law, and it got like 58%. It just barely failed, and it's so sad when you think about it that we're just talking about medical marijuana, and it got 58%, which is a huge majority, but it needed 60 to get through. So in every way, that story is quite depressing. Well, one of the people who vocally opposed this new law was former governor of Florida, Jeb Bush. He said, quote, "Florida leaders and citizens have worked for years to make the Sunshine State a world-class location to start or run a business, a family-friendly destination for tourism, and a desirable place to raise a family or retire. Allowing large-scale marijuana operations to take root across Florida under the guise of using it for medical purposes runs counter to all of these efforts." Now, that's hilarious for multiple reasons. One of them being that Florida had a well-known legacy of being the place to go to for pill mills. The place where you go if you want to get a whole bunch of opiate pills, Percocet, Vicodin, OxyContin, Oxycodone, you name it. If you want to get it and you want to get it cheap and you want to have an old school prescription that isn't even real or isn't even supposed to work anymore, but they had these pain management clinics, which were essentially legal drug dealing places. So for Jeb Bush to make this statement of, oh, come on, we need to keep Florida clean where everybody's high on synthetic heroin, not on marijuana, we can't accept that. So it's hilarious for that reason, but also we learned something today. So Jeb Bush thinks that he's not joking around on these social issues. He considers himself a deep social conservative, right? Well, he just admitted to the Boston Globe that when he was young, he smoked weed. Not only did he smoke weed, he smoked it regularly. Now, the press spoke to his classmates, and his classmates said, yeah, no, the dude was like a pothead. He would smoke nonstop. Now, not only that, he also had Mitt Romney syndrome, or I guess you could call it George W. Bush syndrome, where, according to his classmates, they thought when he was in school, he didn't give a shit, he got horrible grades, he didn't care, and the reason he didn't care is because he knew who his family was, and he knew that he could get away with essentially whatever he wanted. Why is it? It's always the case that when you get these legacy political families, what happens? The younger generations just fucking slack off because they know that they already have this name recognition and they already have high status in society. So they slack off. In the case of George W. Bush, he goes missing from the military and he's doing blow and he's drinking and he's got all these problems and he's clearly unintelligent. In the case of Jeb, he didn't give a shit. He's obviously smarter than George Bush. He didn't give a shit in school, though, and he was smoking weed all the time. And now he's even against it for medical reasons. He's against marijuana for medical reasons. So I'm not the only one that noticed this hypocrisy. Rand Paul pounced. Now, obviously, it goes without saying that the reason why Rand Paul pounced is because he wants to run for president. Jeb Bush wants to run for president. So shots fired here. They're already going at each other's throats because they're trying to get the nomination for the Republican Party. But Rand said, quote, "You would think he'd have a little more understanding then. He was even opposed to medical marijuana. This is a guy who now admits he smoked marijuana, but he wants to put people in jail who do. I think that's the real hypocrisy, is that people on our side, which include a lot of people who made mistakes growing up, admit their mistakes, but now still want to put people in jail for that. He had been caught at Andover, he'd have never, had he been caught at Andover, he'd have never been governor, he'd probably never even have a chance to run for the presidency." So true. Now, this is a point that I've actually heard a lot of people kind of brush it aside and act like, well, whatever, who cares? That's just how it works. This is how it works when you run for president. You admit now that you smoked marijuana ever since, who was the first one that did it? I think it was Clinton who said it, and he's like, I didn't inhale. That obviously was bullshit, but it ended up, he rose in the polls after that interview. I think the interview was with Arsenio Hall. So he was reaching out to, at the time, new platforms of media, and he was reaching out to young people, and so he was popular. And when he said stuff like that, people went, oh, I can relate to him. So now you have every single person that runs for president, or at least the savvy ones, who admit in one way or another, yeah, you know, I tried it. I was cool when I was younger. Aren't I just like you guys, even though I have like $400 million? That's Mitt Romney. That's not Jeb Bush, although I don't know how much Jeb Bush has, but I'm sure it's a lot. But this is a point that you cannot brush aside. If you brush it aside, you're being disingenuous, because it is a fact. If President Obama was caught when he was in the Choom gang and he was smoking like a motherfucker, guess what? He would have been in jail. And we know how the criminal justice system is when it comes to black people, so he would be in real trouble. He would have been in there much longer than if some rich white kid was caught. But even if the rich white kid was caught, right, there's a smaller chance, but could be on the criminal record, could have gone to jail. You know, we're talking about something that you did. If you were caught, your ass would be locked up. And now to say, I want to become president of this country and not push to change that, well, that makes you a complete hypocrite. Because the next guy who could be president might have gotten caught and might be serving a sentence right now. How many lives have been ruined by this drug war? You know, if people don't know this, I want to shed some light on it. Just because somebody smoked marijuana or did drugs or whatever does not mean that they're a violent person. It does not mean that they're a bad person. It does not mean that they're an unintelligent person, any more than somebody who moderately drinks alcohol is a bad person or an unintelligent person, or you name it. So we need to stop with, it's still these leftover beliefs and this leftover system that's primitive. It's this puritanical mindset. It's this 1950s mindset, actually, to be specific, about drug laws. The first drug law was passed in 1914, so it's a 1914 mindset that wasn't based on science. It wasn't based on civil liberties. It wasn't based on personal freedom. There's no rational basis for it, but we still keep it today. Why? Because, oh, that's just how it works. I cannot stand any politician, Republican, Democrat, or whatever, who thinks that that's an argument. Like, there's no doubt in my mind that Jeb Bush, as he casually admitted in this interview, like, yeah, I smoked weed. In his mind, he doesn't think that, you know, means that he should act, if he were president, to reform drug laws. In his mind, there is no hypocrisy. There is no connection. Just, no, that's how it is, so that's how it's got to be. That's not an argument. The idea that that's how it is, so that's how it should be, was never a good argument, ever, 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 on any issue.